Sometimes I forget the era of film and TV before we had all these giant streaming platforms relentlessly trying to suck every dollar out of our bank accounts that they can. I feel like Netflix is obviously the big game changer that everybody can remember, but for me, the one that I've most used over recent years is Disney Plus. Feels like it's been around forever at this point, but when I look back to look at its Wikipedia page, I was pretty mind-boggled to discover it only released at the end of 2019. It's only about 5 years old. I think that COVID well and truly warped my ability to keep track of how fast or how slow time's passing. We're getting off topic though, because since the release of the likes of Disney Plus, I've gotten very used to getting some very cool content that I didn't think would ever be made otherwise. A bunch of the different Star Wars TV shows starting with The Mandalorian and continuing onwards. The different Marvel TV shows that have gotten increased prominence and presence within the MCU simply because of Disney Plus. Right over to the likes of Walt Disney Animated Studios and Pixar Animation releasing long-form content for the platform alongside their cinematic releases. To say that this type of thing got me massively hyped up would be an understatement. For years we'd been witnessing a golden era for animation, specifically those two studios where in the 2010s they were dominating everything, every single metric. They were raking in the cash at the box office, cracking the big billion multiple times apiece, and setting records. At the same time, they were managing to win audience and critical acclaim, and both won a stack of Oscars. So why the hell not? Let's keep pumping it out. Let's have more of that. And we did get more of that, until we didn't. Because only recently we got the news that going forward, both Walt Disney Animated Studios and Pixar Animation will cease production on long-form content and shift their focus and concern entirely towards cinematic productions, which, yeah. This one really hit me where it hurts. I'm not a massive fan of this new creative and business mandate. Of course, before we go any further in that direction and try to talk about the positives and negatives of this sort of thing, I will acknowledge the elephant in the room. I could rant and rave about the creative side of things until I'm blue in the face. They did this because it makes more sense for them financially. I think it's clear that based on the quality of the animation we've been getting for these shows, stuff like Zootopia Plus or Win or Lose, that they're not exactly making them on the cheap. At the same time, they're releasing the same number of films as they were before, and so it's certain that they'd need to take on additional animators and staff to produce the content they need. Let's be real, all of this is being made in pursuit of profit. I won't pretend to know how all of that would be calculated for these sorts of shows, but I'd expect that since they're direct to streaming, they'd analyse the viewership data and determine what proportion of their active subscribers are watching the content and thus want stuff like this released. This would also probably be compared with how many new subscribers come onto the platform and immediately watch this content. I suppose they'd need to then measure that against how much money they're spending on these sorts of projects to begin with, which would in turn let them figure out whether they're worth making at all. Obviously, the shows did not pass muster. We know for a fact that they're stopping production, and the Tiana show specifically was cited as something that was far too expensive to make. So, I get it. That's why it's for the bottom line. Nothing beyond that matters. To the studio, at least. I can still personally be mad. Because I liked the content, I was looking forward to more of the content, and I don't want to see people losing their jobs en masse, which is certainly going to happen now, because their jobs are now obsolete. However, I do want to try to be fair. I'll huff some copium and try to think of an angle where these cancellations could, for audience enjoyment at the very least, be a good thing. Perhaps the biggest way in which this could serve as a net benefit is in the quality of the studio's output. At the very least, when we talk about Walt Disney Animated Studios, I think it's clear that their last couple of films have had a bit of a mixed reception. Whilst Moana 2 recently was very good, before that we had Wish, which did not do all that well, and got hate when it released to celebrate 100 years of Disney. Before that, Strange World was also quite bad. I think the last film that Disney released that they consider an overwhelming success would have to be Frozen 2, way back in 2019, and also before the launch of Disney Plus. The films since then have either not been well received, have not made the splash at the box office they wanted to, or both. It's been a bit of a disaster, really. So I guess I can understand the idea that you want to divert your primary resources into making the big money spinners successful, moving your best ideas and your best animators/creative team members into that arena. Hell, from what I understand, wasn't Moana 2 originally meant to be a series and at the last minute they retooled it into a film because they weren't getting the box office results they needed? So maybe it's clear that financially this is the right move. Moana 2 was a hit. With all the flops they were churning out, they would have had to have been bleeding money. So they needed to turn the ship around somehow. So the hope here would be that by doing this and cutting the fat, you'd be able to take the best of the best and make a super team to make really great films that do well critically and commercially. I have no idea how they decide who's going to stay and who's going to go and whatnot. And it actually makes me rather sad to think of how many people are going to lose their jobs. If only they'd leaned into sequels earlier, maybe we wouldn't be here. Maybe this wouldn't be happening. I'm just talking out my ass here though, I don't actually know. It is funny to ponder about the financial strain on these studios when both of them just released billion-dollar grossing films though. Just something to think about. That being said, as a consumer, I can't help but feel I'm getting shortchanged by this new direction. Even though the long-form content that Disney Animation's been releasing was pretty short, all things considered, the likes of Zootopia Plus, Olaf Presents, and Baymax, they were truly awesome shows that were a lot of fun for me. They allowed the studio to utilize their classic characters and worlds in fun and different ways that you normally wouldn't get to see. You might in response tell me, oh, they have a television animation studio that should be able to do all the things you want to see, but then I'd ask you, would they have the same resources and the same budget? Forgive me for assuming, but I'd think there's absolutely no chance that a studio that is not one of the big flagships is going to get the same funding allocation and support as one of the big players. It simply won't be the same. Even then though, I think I can rationalize to myself that in the end, these were just shorts. Whilst they were good, they weren't a huge amount of content. I will miss Tiana's show as well, but at the same time, at least they're committed to releasing that as a short at some point in the future. So part of me wonders whether they're actually going to be following through on that at all. If it cost so much to make that it got itself cancelled, will they just not shelve the whole project to try to take the write-off, Wile E. Coyote style? Wouldn't be surprised to never see it come out, which makes me feel worse about the whole thing, really. That being said, this is not what bothers me the most. The one that really gets me is Pixar is also discontinuing making long-form content for Disney+. Once again, from a financial POV, it's whatever. I get it, I don't like it, but they're in it for the money. As a consumer though, as a fan, it pisses me off. Because unlike Walt Disney Animated Studios, Pixar has a whole heap of really great shows that came out in the last couple of years. Not just 2 or 3. There's Forky Asks a Question, and Monsters at Work, Doug Days, Cars on the Road, Dream Productions, and now Win or Lose. So much quality right there on display, to the point that it's deeply frustrating that we're not going to be getting any more of this type of storytelling from Pixar. Even more so when you think about how much money they just made off of Inside Out 2. Specifically, I'm mourning the recent additions to their library that I just mentioned before. Dream Productions and Win or Lose. That's the type of content that Pixar's so well known for. Stories and characters that are relatable. They're able to take the mundane or normal human experience and apply them so perfectly in the weirdest of ways. Dream Productions is a story of a film studio set within Riley's mind in the world of Inside Out. Their whole life purpose, their whole mandate is to make dreams. Presented in a mockumentary style for the most part, the show tells the story of Paula Persimmon, an acclaimed dream director who needs to come to terms with the fact that her time's passing. She can't continue to do things the way she used to do, as that type of dream is no longer what the audience, Riley, seems to enjoy. It cleverly interweaves a coming-of-age narrative with the story of losing your spot and being phased out in the workplace, of growing older, and also using old Hollywood history to tie it all together. On a fundamental level, it draws an audience of all ages together through this clever storytelling that allows anybody to connect with the characters. It was just a triumph in every respect. Really funny as well. Now, we currently have the show Win or Lose releasing on Disney+, although by the time this is released, it might have already wrapped up. Win or Lose to me is Pixar at its very best. A varied story that doesn't force the narrative to play out in a linear respect. Each episode covers the exact same stretch of time. You follow one character, you see their life. It might intersect with a future character and make you wonder, what's going on there? Later on, in a different episode for that subsequent character, you get the other side of that scene. Or you see a character whose story you've already watched, and it gets you excited because you're in the know. The way in which the scenes and the overall stories play out are entirely dependent on the character's point of view. And thus, the same scene can play out differently between the episodes, with different emotion, words, or facial expressions that all conform to the bias of the character. So in one scene, you might get a certain impression of a character or a moment, only for a later episode to completely blow your mind and make you question whose interpretation is correct. Who's telling the truth? Who's allowing bias to cloud their judgment? It's a show that lets you engage with the story and the characters in a very unique way in that respect. And that's not even taking into account how they interweave different animation styles into the episodes based on the various different characters and how that would fit into their sense of self. The show takes core life issues, anxiety about not being good enough, fears about committing to love, a crushing sense of responsibility, having to be strong for others at the expense of yourself, trying to make friends and yet sacrificing your own morality to fit in, or being afraid to be your true self because you don't want to be judged. The show interweaves these themes and storylines so cleverly in a way that everybody's able to relate to. Even if you can't specifically relate to the character and their personal story, the message behind the story is something you can latch onto, and at the very least, you can understand it. I truly think this is going to go down as an all-timer of a show. So my heart breaks at no follow-up, no season 2, no nothing. It's such a shame. I seriously hate this endless pursuit of profit. It's so anti-consumer, it's unreal. And before anybody comes at me saying, oh, it's Disney's right to do that, you have no right to complain. 1, stop standing for corpos, you cringe lord. And 2, you're not a Disney executive, so their financials really shouldn't matter all that much to you. Sit down. Really, I'm just getting salty now. This news has been a buzz killer for sure. Because whilst other studios perhaps would make stuff like this, none of them are going to do it with this budget. And so it'll struggle to be as good in my opinion. Hopefully the show gets popular enough to maybe make some sort of movie tie-in in this universe. I think the multi-perspective really is a cool concept and would work as a film. I mean, Pulp Fiction exists. There's just more to be had in this world. For stuff like Dream Productions though, I think we just have to mourn and let it go. Move on. Let's hope the movies they make are good enough to compensate for our losses. Otherwise, I'm going to be very upset. Now, we'll call it here before I ruin my whole day with this. And so, with all that being said, these have just been my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What did you think of what I've had to say today? Are you with me? Maybe you side with the studio's interesting point of view. I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.